As recently as the early 2000s, the term transgender did not exist. It was created to normalize the victimization, primarily of women and young girls, by sexual deviants, almost all of them male. Some of these deviants have medical and scientific credentials. In at least 2 cases, are also known sex offenders. In part 1 of this interview with Jon Uhler, the founder of unmaskingthetransmovement.com, Jon explained the descent that people who born as normal kids take later in life to a point of wanting to victimize others. But that was only the start. Many organizations and groups, primarily the medical and pharmaceutical industries, are making huge profits from transitioning their victims. Jon is a licensed professional counselor, a certified clinical trauma professional, a certified sex offender treatment provider, and is forensically certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. His professional clinical background spans over 30 years. In part 2 of this interview, Jon shows the charts and statistics that prove the movement only really took off once the medical community was given permission to charge our government for trans surgeries. Surgeries which maim their victims for life, leading to severe health issues and an obscene suicide rate. They profit at the expense of the health, future, and very lives of our kids.
Well, in response to what you just said, let me show this slide, or this screenshot comes from my very first video I did. It's called Unmasking the Trans, or Understanding the Trans Movement. I wanted people to understand the different kinds of special interests that converge, that use this as the perfect opportunity to further their agenda or to benefit themselves. And so what people need to understand is it's not that each of these special interests, in my estimation, it's not that every single one is behind the scenes in a smoke-filled room, or maybe they don't smoke, but anyways, not that they are collaborating. I believe probably a number of them do. But if people can begin to understand, in a new chart, I would actually put the outline of a child's body in the middle box. Okay, so really the child is in the middle, and these are entities that are benefiting from the world's greatest scam. And this thing, my contention is, and I'll show you a slide here momentarily, that there are 2 things that drive the trans movement. And if you remove these 2 influences, essentially the entire movement will dry up and blow away. Back to the numbers we saw in 2005, which was non-existent. I've been doing therapy long enough that once, prior to working in prison on psych staff, I had my own adolescent female group home, a 12-bed adolescent female group home, of the most severe kind of cases. Well, those are the ones that you're finding in the trans movement right now. And if you want to find out anything true about social, about culture, about youth culture, about social influences, including about yourself, they'll tell you. You work with severely emotionally disturbed teens, and they'll tell you about everything, right? They're guarded on the one hand, they don't trust anybody, but they'll sure tell you because they don't have a filter. There was never any reference to anything trans in all my grad school books. So all the grad classes, all the textbooks, I graduated in 1992. You will never find a reference to trans. So we're being told that in order to believe that this is a real thing, then that all the professionals, all the educators, all the medical schools, all the graduate schools of psychology, they all missed it up until about 2009. I'll show you what happened in 2009. It was essentially RuPaul, right? Frankly, it was a drag race thing. But in 2013, the DSM-5 made all of this billable. So the 2 primary influences, well, 3 is social media, but the 2 primary influences are pornography, which grooms a child, dumbs their intuition down, and therefore they're easily manipulated, and the DSM-5, which made everything billable. So it made it profitable. So quickly, let me go through these different special interests so people understand.
If before we do that, can I ask you to tell us what DSM-5 stands for?
Oh, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition. It's the volume that all psychiatry and psychologists use in the U.S. and Canada for diagnosing and billing codes. The ICD, the International Classification Diagnostic Manual 11 now, Europe uses. And they tend to parallel one another, but all the different disorders are found in those volumes. So starting with the dark green, you have certain people like Soros who want to change society. And so he's what would be called a social engineer. You then will go clockwise. You have big foundations and endowments. They're pouring a lot of money into this movement for a couple different reasons. Martine Rothblatt, Jennifer Billick, I highly recommend the 11th Hour blog. She does a wonderful job. She traces the money. She's very concerned about the transhumanism movement, which gets into things that I still don't totally understand, but she is very concerned that this is the precursor to eventually the co-opting of the human body. And so it's doing away with genders. But in some of these large foundations, they're influencing medical schools, they're influencing the law schools, they're influencing different policy-making organizations, they're influencing the APA, they're influencing the American Pediatric Society. So these are people with a lot of money. Big banks. There's a lot of different reasons why banks are very interested in seeing this thing move forward, not the least of which recently they're offering credit cards for kids that want to have their sex organs amputated. Big pharma, that goes without saying. So puberty blockers, wrong sex hormones, cross-sex hormones, these kids are being made big pharma customers for life. Big medical doctors and hospitals, that goes without saying. You will see, you follow the money, and inevitably you're going to see pushing a lot of these things are these different hospitals that have transgender affirming care. So they're making money off these young people. As a matter of fact, Matt Walsh, love him or hate him, he had his producer pretend to be a male that was looking to have it to be castrated. And he was given a referral over the phone within 20 minutes. Plastic surgeons, goes without saying, on both ends of this. So you remove a young person's breasts, and also eventually they're going to want to have them replaced once they come out of the grips of the cult, like mindset. Transgender medical clinics and services, that goes without saying why they would be interested. Here's a huge concern in the purple, the light purple, SOGI sex ed, that stands for sexual orientation, gender identity. That's all the deviant materials and all the deviant books being pushed into schools. Benjamin Levine, who was arrested with horrific child pornography, used to be the Secretary of Education for Ontario. And he was the one really responsible for sex ed, but now he's a sex offender and he got out. But he's extremely deviant. So if you want a way to sexually groom kids, you start pumping highly sexualized and deviant materials into schools, and now you have them. And who benefits? Planned Parenthood is right in there. Planned Parenthood benefits if girls become pregnant or if young men want to go on cross-sex hormones. And isn't it interesting? You don't hear Planned Parenthood protesting against deviant men going into women's private spaces. So I now say that Planned Parenthood is turning girls into boys and boys into girls. But human services, social services, and foster care, they're now, quote unquote, specialized foster homes. Yet my contention is, we've seen a number of them now, that the men who are cross-dressing, who dress in women's underwear, who want to self-identify there are a number of cases now where we have found that they are into human trafficking and prostituting kids out. So they look for vulnerable kids. We have the beginning of the blue squares, sales and marketing of trans products and services. Think about Target, right? Think about what Bud Light was doing before Bud Light realized what happens when the marketplace can vote with its feet. Same thing for Target, right? I think $27 billion loss in stock value for Bud Light. Media, TV, Hollywood, influence, Nickelodeon, Disney, RuPaul, I Am Jazz, 50 Shades, the different media, movies and shows. Moving to the lighter blue, corporations, media sponsors, use of punitive measures. So corporations are now in the mix. A lot of corporations are donating to those organizations. For instance, the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project, in my estimation, is very concerning because not only have a number of stories, exposés come out, how mothers, different women, pretended to be gender confused, calling up the Trevor Project, which is based in West Hollywood, which is a hub for runaway kids. Sam Britton was in a very key position of the Trevor Project before being tapped to do the government job, and found out that he was stealing women's underwear even when he was at the Trevor Project. It is the perfect opportunity to gain access to very vulnerable kids. And as a matter of fact, Sam Britton spoke out in defense of what was called Rent Boy magazine, their website. The term rent boy is used in the Netherlands for young male prostitutes, which is sex trafficking. A lot of the kids are brought over from England. So that is promoting sex trafficking. And so, plus they were pushing the cross-sex hormones on these kids and doing a lot of damage. You then have social media. There's some of the major social media. So they have a vested interest in this. We're now at 7 o'clock in this clock. Pimps and human traffickers, that is one of my concerns right there. They have a vested interest in pushing this because vulnerable kids will get into the social transitioning, and they are easy targets for individuals to begin to cross their boundaries and recruit them. As a matter of fact, some of those professionals that are pushing the transitioning of kids will suggest, and Alex Aron brought this to my attention during the interview on the dangers of transgender medicine, says that pushers of this ruse will suggest that while troubled females, biological females, are awaiting to have their breasts removed, and if they want to gain financial support in order to go through the surgeries, as the surgeons are not donating their time, then maybe they should try prostitution for a time to get the money for that surgery. Here's my primary concern. We're at about now 8 o'clock in this chart. Sexual predators and pedophiles. There you have the porn industry. They all benefit from this. Moving into the green, politicians who receive campaign contributions for their votes. And now we're back to the top. So those are the special interests that are...
It would almost be easier to identify the organizations that aren't involved.
There you go. Matter of fact, let me now, I found the chart with the DSM so people can see what this is. And here's some influences. It was actually going to be the next slide up. I will increase. Okay. So if you want to see really what led to or contributing significant contributors to the increase, and this is not a trend. A trend goes up in a mild slope. Dr. Michelle Curtella calls this, statistically speaking, this is a J curve. This is a tidal wave. So you can see there's the DSM-5. What you will see is wherever you look at statistics for referrals to gender services, gender clinics, it begins to spike at the year 2013. Wherever you go around the world, when you're looking at these stats from around the world, and you will see that the spike begins in 2013. And I tell people, prove me wrong. Well, the question is, if it's universal, that's not happenstance. That's not located to one country or another or geographic region. What happened in 2013? It became profitable. Without the 13 individuals sitting on that one committee, I call them the dirty dozen plus one, this would never have been possible. Look at the stats in 2005. That's even before the sex change hospital. It was virtually zero. Let me show you a couple other stats. Now, here's for breast surgeons.
John, I'm going to ask you to scroll back down to that chart, please, because I've got a couple of questions, and I'm certain that my viewers will as well, because I have to confess, RuPaul I've heard of, Sex Change Hospital, Transform Me, I Am Jazz. I've never heard of these. I don't watch television. Could you briefly tell us what these are?
Sure. And I'm forgetting, and now my viewers are going to chastise me. The middle guy. Matter of fact, there was that series on a female prison, Orange is the New Black or something like that.
Yes.
Okay. This black guy dressed as a female starred in that. So this was the most famous actor dressing up in drag at the time. So actress, and kind of made a big splash. RuPaul that was when RuPaul's Drag Race. It's now in its 15th season, I believe. Okay, these are all embarrassment
of Canadians. Our Prime Minister has appeared on the show.
Okay, there we go. That's right. So you can see a bump right there. I will have to go and recall who that black actor, claiming to be an actress, was. DSM.
I guess what I'm trying to get at here is these are all shows that are promoting transgenderism.
That's right. Now, Jazz Jennings is the greatest tragedy in my estimation. Jazz Jennings, at age 5, was transitioned by his mother. And it became the show I Am Jazz. And Jazz wrote a book. Now Jazz is, I want to say 25, 24, an absolute wreck. He got a scholarship to Harvard. He had to turn that down initially. Jazz weighs probably close to 250 pounds, and he's only probably 5'8". So you can see all the dynamics, all that internal struggle. As a matter of fact, on one of the episodes recently, it was caught on film. He was saying that he's never felt like himself, but it looks like a girl. And Jazz looks like a girl, but Jazz was a boy that was transitioned by his mother, interviewed by Barbara Walters. And that was one of the key things that pushed and influenced things around the world. And the next was Bruce Jenner. Let me scroll up here. Well, so do you have any other additional questions on this?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
In fact, as we're talking kind of behind the scenes, so ask some additional questions if you have some. As a matter of fact, okay, here's RuPaul. Let me bring this up. Right there. Now, this will also historically show you the previous versions of the DSM. So the DSM has gone through various versions. Look at the numbers of kids being referred for transgender medicine with the red volume. That was called the DSM-4. It's 0. Would I challenge Blanchard? Would I challenge Zucker? Those are 2 of the dirty dozen plus 1. I simply say this. Now that you have seen, look what happened in 2013 with the publishing of that volume. There's RuPaul. You can see there's a spike, but nothing compared to when the DSM made all of these services profitable. what I ask publicly, I've answered it multiple times in different interviews and my own podcasts, is for Blanchard and Zucker to do the right thing, say that they didn't realize by changing from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. That was the difference. Gender dysphoria, and it included teenagers. So gender identity disorder really focused on younger kids. And usually if there was going to be a gender confused child, it was going to be a boy that was confused about his gender. But the majority of the kids, I'll scroll down now, the majority of the kids that are being impacted, are they male or female? They're female. That's why we know this doesn't fit the normal mental health model. And those are for breast surgeries. And again, that's 2016. So you can see how in 2013, we got 3 years later, look what's happening. So it makes sense. The kids are going to start to transition socially, medically, and then they're going to have their breasts chopped off. And a lot of them wait till either 17, although there are stats that minors have gone through these surgeries, but some doctors would wait until the kid's 18th birthday, but then they had them on hormones for a year prior. So it started reasonably in, let's say, grade 9 or grade 10, 9th or 10th grade, so they get into high school. DSM comes along in 2013. So now by the time a young person's in a senior in a high school or just graduates, and now they can get the breast chopped off. So they've been manipulated for 3 years by that time. But ever since then, the stats have gone younger.
Yes, and here in Canada, our government is pushing to have this available to what they call mature minors, children as young as 14, without parental consent.
That's right. That's right. As a matter of fact, let me give you a couple more slides so people can really let this sink in. We're just going to let the numbers speak for themselves. What were the stats like in 2005? And let's see, where is this? This is the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. So this is Australia.
I want to make something, I've got a question to ask there. So this is the Royal Children's Hospital, Australia. So these numbers we're looking at, this is just one hospital.
There you go. I think in Australia, they, you know what? I shouldn't speak out of turn. Is it like in England? The Tavistock, it was the main service, or was, for this. So it was socialized medicine. So I have to plead ignorance. Let me go up to another stat. Okay, so there's Jazz Jennings. Now look at who was impacted most. Because historically, if there was a gender of a child, sex of a child that was confused, boys or girls, and was confused about what their gender was, and very, very few, quite frankly, myself and my colleagues, I mean, it was so few that it was not even brought up in grad school. If you leave a kid alone and you don't bring up their sex or gender, they won't have an issue. It'll resolve prior to the age of puberty. But because of bullying, because of other things, or because of maybe a dad making an issue out of it, but it was always the boys. But look at the number of girls.
Jon, I'm going to get you to stay on this slide for a minute because you've triggered a question, and it goes back to something we were discussing in part one of this interview. We're talking about the fact that these almost entirely men who are driving this agenda, deviant men, have reached this point of psychopathy where they want to harm people, they want to victimize people, and these are the same deviant men who are victimizing women, and then they go after children because children are easier to victimize. And so I'm looking at this, and it occurs to me, this is no mistake or coincidence that the girls are being targeted at a much higher rate. These deviants who are behind this, they hate women, they want to prey on people, and so young females become their preferred target.
There you go. And, what's interesting is when Bill sees sex, I submitted a video for that when it was being considered in Canada. And unfortunately, then it passed. Cantor and Blanchard spoke out against C-sex. And I was hearing rave reviews. They did a wonderful job. I mean, they did a fine job. But I thought, wait a second. So Blanchard being one of the people behind the DSM-5, the working group, Cantor pushing the destigmatization of pedophilia, why would they speak out against this? My own hunch is because they don't want to lose the biological sex of little boys. They don't want to have boys' bodies carved up. I'll let people run with that. Okay, because it would be very easy then if there were only 13 people, but two of the most influential, Blanchard and Zucker, Cantor was not a part of the DSM-5, but he was involved. He says so himself, kind of behind the scenes. So 2 out of the 12 people, and then you had the overall editor, so 13. So if Zucker and Blanchard don't like what's happened, so much so that Blanchard was willing to speak out against Bill C-6 at the time, I forget what they changed the number of it. If they see what's happened, then why don't they have the intellectual and academic and professional integrity to say, you know what, we didn't see that by simply changing from gender identity disorder to dysphoria, we opened a can of worms. We're going to go back to the diagnosis that was just fine back in the DSM-4. There was nothing wrong with that. Why don't they do that? Why don't they simply say, you know what, we missed it. We didn't anticipate we were opening a Pandora's box. So for public safety and the health of these kids, so instead of going to a government committee appealing to them not to permit these surgeries, why don't you remove the profit motive by going back to the DSM-4? That seems like that would be much faster and easier, but they were able to look like heroes. But there's nothing heroic about their work that permitted all this, that now they're having to appeal to legislative bodies saying, please don't permit these surgeries. There's something very disingenuous about that. Let me show you another chart. Now we're going to see Bruce Jenner. So we've seen RuPaul, the influence of RuPaul. We've seen I Am Jazz Jennings, and now there is Bruce Jenner. But again, look at what tends to stand out. What's the one common denominator that really starts to get the J curve going, according to Dr. Michelle Curtilla, as she referred to this as? It was the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 made all of this an industry. It made it all billable. As you notice, these doctors aren't donating their time. You notice Big Pharma isn't donating all the pharmaceuticals.
Wow. Sorry, folks, I need a minute. Those of you who have watched my interviews know that I have a very hard time with people harming children. And right now, I got to tell you, I am furious. John, it's a rare time when a journalist is speechless, but I think I'm speechless. I really don't know what to say about this. Prior to this interview, I was, of course, extremely concerned about all of this and felt that there was some kind of mass psychosis going on. To find out that this is all being engineered for profit.
Correct.
And the victims are our children.
Right. That's why I felt compelled. My kids are grown. Every now and then I think, you know what, why do I keep doing this? Because I know that this is a grand scheme. And that's why I have made an offer to any of these professionals. Come on my program. Debate me. You choose the setting. I have a live internet TV program that I can access. as far as a platform, come debate me. If you want to try to justify this, if you want to try to sit there and tell us it's real, for instance, I will simply say this: there's no such thing as trans. It's a ruse. But it's taken hold over 20 years to where now it's like, what are you talking about? You hate trans. My response is there's no such thing as trans. There's not a trans kids. There's not a trans anything. There are kids that are confused, that are being exploited. That's all there are.
Yes.
Male and female.
And
boys and
think
girls.
And this is something I have touched on before. All of us felt out of place as kids. It's just part of being a child.
There we go.
And so they're preying on this. They're saying, well, if you transition, now you'll feel like you belong.
Right. It's a cult. Or they utilize the best of time-tested cult-like techniques that are found in. So if you really want to understand the tactics that have been used to brainwash, and we don't like that term, so I say to unduly influence, to mentally and emotionally manipulate kids and adults, then you look no further than the methods that are used in Scientology and the former sex cult NXIVM with Keith Raniere and Allison Mack, where you took very intelligent individuals that paid a lot of money for what they were thinking in NXIVM. As a matter of fact, there was a made-for-TV movie called Escaping NXIVM. I recommend people go and watch that. Watch the methods of manipulation to a point where you had an inner circle of women who really were a harem for Keith Raniere, who's now doing life in prison. What would it take to get reasonably intelligent adult women to lay down on a table without anesthesia and allow a female doctor to take a cottering iron and carve some markings right in their groin area, below their belt? And it turns out that those markings, one of the survivors of this was from Canada. She wrote a book called Scarred, but you can go online, just do a simple internet search under images, scars of NXIVM or Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. And the markings that were used by a cottering tool without anesthesia in the groin area turned out to be the initials for Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. They became their property. Well, how do you do that? How do you take a woman that's just going for self-improvement courses to eventually they're willing to allow themselves to be branded over time? And there's various methods, time-tested, cult-like brainwashing techniques, unduly mentally and emotionally influencing someone. Those are being used by those that are pushing this movement. And so what do cults do? The very first thing they have to do, most of us, if you've ever studied cults like the Hare Krishnas or the Monis, and this is back in the 70s and 80s, the very first thing that a cult has to do is isolate their target of opportunity, and they would typically isolate them from their family. Why? Because the family members are going to start to see some changes, and they're going to start to ask questions. Well, you can't have that. So the cult member, whether a religion and an actual, this just doesn't have to have weird titles. You can have certain churches or faith-based organizations or movements or families, as they call them. So if you're a manipulator, and this is where part of my strength comes in as far as a clinician, because as I work with sexual abuse survivors, there are a number of sexual abuse survivors that were manipulated. And there's parts of them, as it were, that are still sort of, they call it trauma bonding. I actually use a term that's half-baked healing. But have you ever seen someone who seems to go back to their abuser? We see it all the time in domestic violence. And the question is, what goes on inside of someone, or someone that has, we even use this term, a love-hate relationship with a certain parent. It's abusive, but they hate it, and then there's a big blow up and the person storms out of the house, but before you know it, a few months later, they're back in the home. And the question is, right, then you have a lot of domestic situations going on. I worked with a number of guys in prison on psych staff that were in prison for violence against a brother or a dad. I remember one guy shot his dad on Christmas Day. Alcohol was involved, but dad triggered the adult child by saying certain things. You're a lazy, no good. Why can't you be more like your brother? Well, this guy beats the hell out of his dad and then shoots. I forget where he didn't kill him. And when you talk to him, it's like, was that the first time you've ever gotten in an argument with you? No, we've always fought about this. Then you ask him, well, why did you go back? So this process is very understandable. That's what's in play. And so these pushers understand the psychology behind it. So you want to bring the target of opportunity toward you, and you want to separate them from anybody that's going to pull them away. The idea of anti-conversion therapy, that is cult speak. That's all, it's illegal in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, parts of the US. Whoever captures the terminology and the language captures the argument, so to speak. And so the premise that a therapist wants to convert anybody is a misnomer. And with Sam Britton, it's come out that these people will completely fabricate these things. So I challenge anybody. I don't think conversion therapy ever really happened. Oh, you have people, but I'm accepting somebody's first-person self-report. Sam Britton was very convincing. Well, the idea that a therapist or an actual therapist, legitimate therapist, wants to convert anybody, my job is not to convert anybody. My job is to figure out, what does the person want for themselves? What is their agenda for themselves? What are they trying to work on? And then I help facilitate them getting clarity, them clarifying their values. People have enough time. I have enough time running my own life. I don't need to run anybody else's life. So the idea that a therapist would be out to convert anybody is silly and insulting. What's happened with this term is, think about a cult. So a cult now has recruited, they've gotten their influence, their hands around this potential target of opportunity. They're starting to influence them, whether it's school, they have these kids for 6 to 8 hours per day, or a friend, or it's on social media. The kid is being drawn into this realm, into the family, into the community, into this cult-like dynamic, away from their family. Why is that an issue? Because typically, all things being equal, family cares. So the cult is gonna drive a wedge. The cult leader, the manipulator, the sociopath, psychopath, whoever's gonna try to use this guy, they're gonna drive a wedge between whoever's gonna be protective, whoever's gonna speak information and truth to this kid. So the problem is the cult has a head start. So the cult starts to establish this relationship, the manipulator, the perpetrator, the oppressor, the person that's manipulating the kid. They bring the kid, the young person, the young adult to themselves, and they've done that by saying, we accept you, we love you, we understand you, and they start placing seeds of doubt. So it's the carrot and the stick. They play to the young person's felt need. And so by the time the parents find out, by the time the friends find out, that the deal's almost sealed because it's being kept under wraps until it's suddenly announced. And now the parents are caught off guard because the parents didn't know somebody's been working this kid. That's grooming.
Yes.
And so now, they've been able to manipulate the kid. And now what every cult will say is this: we are your true family. You've come home. You're in the community. We accept you. You're ours, So you've come home. So if any outsider tries to get them out from under the cult-like influence, the cult leader, the perpetrator, the manipulator, the oppressor can say, you are converting this person away from us. Very diabolical. So they flip the script.
And unfortunately, the cult leader, the groomer in our society today, through our educational system, is our own government.
Correct.
Jon, I'd like to finish, and I always try to finish my interviews with a message of hope, because we can push back. People are starting to push back. And I noticed that on the website, on your website, unmaskingthetransmovement.com, you have something called the Parents Procedure Plan.
Yes.
can you please tell us what parents can do to push back against this and protect their kids?
That's right. It's really a two-pronged approach. One is tackling those forces, those entities that are trying to gain access to your kid. So school boards, policies and procedures, getting new people into office. You have to fight against this because the hordes are at the door. They're actively vying for your children. Why? Think about the special interests. Each special interest has something to gain. You have financial special interests, you have sexual special interests, you have all those that we looked at in the first part. Then the second is you have to be able to guard your child's heart and really ensure that you win the heart of your child, that you stay close to your child. I don't mean the helicopter parent. What I mean by is this. If you have people that are nefarious, that have designs for somebody's child to exploit them, I use that in the broadest sense, that I'm going to benefit once I get that person in the door, into the community, in the family, whatever we're going to call this, I can use them. So that's exploitation. It's a battle for the heart and the mind. And the best way to protect a child against a perpetrator, a predator, a manipulator, a cult leader is to maintain that good relationship, open communication. And I would say because of, in our day and age, every kid now has heard of this binary, non-binary. If you start hearing a child use the term non-binary and pronouns, you're already now behind the curve. Somebody's begun to manipulate that child. They've begun to cross boundaries, and they've begun to cause the child to doubt their own intuition. Our intuition is the reality testing mechanism within us. You're going to have to bring information. So our site, unmaskingthetransmovement.com, is a very good one. There's about 104 episodes on there of subject matter experts. What we don't need is hype. We need facts, we need details, we need an understanding as far as adults and parents. What I do recommend, and good people differ with this, but I do recommend this, at the right time, help a child understand what the trans movement is. And I'll, in brief, it's simply this. Trans movement, the best way to understand this is it is a moving sidewalk. The moving sidewalk, at whatever point in time a child gets on, whether it's social even before social transitioning, we're using the manipulation of kindness. Our kindness is being used against us. So now we're in the name of tolerance. We're starting to go along. So kids are starting to go along. Then there will be social transitioning. So somehow along the way, the child is going to begin to alter their pronouns, alter their dress. We need to balance with that, but people are beginning to manipulate them toward the opposite sex, so away from their own gender, and now be gender neutral. And then they're going to continue eventually being influenced to do what? Start to cross-dress. That's still going after the emotions, and it's breaking down the barriers. And during that time, by the way, they are very ripe for predators to prey upon them sexually. Eventually, it's going to head toward medicalization. Puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, those will sterilize a child forever. So we have the medicalization. That sidewalk is still moving. The trans movement, to understand it, by that time, the child's already going to be a big pharma customer. You're altering the body. This is experimental medication that's being given to kids, these treatments. The sidewalk will eventually the moving sidewalk will eventually dump a child out onto a surgeon's gurney where they will have their sex organs amputated and be a big pharma consumer for life until they awaken out of the cult-like stupor and then have to figure out, what did I do to myself? How did I do this? How did I let people? And the detransitioners, that population is growing exponentially. Why? Because they've come out of a cult-like stupor, and now they're scarred physically and mentally and emotionally for life. I just posted a post by a young person on my Twitter page, and the person essentially says, F you to all the therapists and surgeons that did this to me. You guys fast-tracked me into this, and now I'm left with all this. So to educate kids along the way, to show them, honey, here's what happens if you put these things into your body. Do you understand that you will never be able to have kids? You will never, we won't have grandkids, you won't have kids. These are also the harms. Bone density loss, osteoporosis, effects on the heart, effects on the brain. Start listing those things out, and then also show kids the pictures of the surgeries, right? Full information. We shouldn't be scared, right? If this is true, and I'll bring one picture that I recommend parents show. Let me see if I have it right here. Okay, here's a good example. In closing, right, sorry. But this is important because this is really what we're talking about. Let the pictures speak. This was a girl. Now this young girl thinks she's a boy. And by this time, they've already been on puberty blockers. They've already been on cross-sex hormones. There are horrific pictures. There's also pictures where the skin grafts. So for girls, they're going to create fake penises out of skin grafts in the forearm or on the thigh. And these things look like monstrosities. Scott Nugent does a wonderful job trying to, I think his site is called Scream Louder. Scott is a biological female featured in the film, Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman? And he is not going to live much longer. He has horrible, horrible medical issues because she became convinced that and this was as an adult, that because she didn't fit in with the normal, quote unquote, feminine stereotype. And she felt, well, if I'm going to run with the guys, so to speak, in the sense she was in sales, if I'm going to be, I must be a guy. So she started to transition. It has ruined her life. She looks like a guy, goes by Scott Nugent. And, Scott's been doing a wonderful job testifying before state houses, saying this is destroying kids for profit. And I say for sexual and financial profit.
So in summary, then, the best thing that parents can do to protect their children is to educate themselves so that they can educate their children.
100%.
All right.
If somebody's targeting your kid, especially in any kind of public schools, even in private schools now, sadly, but social media, it's all out there. Look at Pride Month. Look at the whole thing. It's all, you can't escape it. And in Canada, it's worse than ever. Because if you don't affirm your child, one dad ended up going to prison, ended up in jail. So start early, help the child understand biology, help them understand chromosomes, help them understand that they're going to go through puberty, a time where they're not going to feel comfortable in their own bodies, but they're not born in the wrong body. That is a delusion. They're born just exactly as they're supposed to be born. They're a boy or a girl. And there's a lot of predators now, pushers of this ruse that intend to gain access to the hearts and minds of people's kids.
Jon, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
And my pleasure. Thank you for having me.